Hey everybody, welcome to Larp Mentor. We're going to be talking about designing LARPs today. I'm just going to wait for some of our guests to kind of pile in. This is an interactive chat, so I am here to answer your questions and see what questions you have about co-designing live action role-playing games. So at any point in time, if you have questions, drop them in the window. You are going to see me turn to the side here because I have a monitor over here that's actually checking out the chat tonight so that I can address all of your questions. And if you have something that I didn't get to, don't worry about it. I will turn my attention over here, here and there to make sure that I get to it shortly. So, yeah, welcome to Co-Designing LARPs. I'm Tara Clapper. I am the LARP Mentor, which you can learn more about at larpmentor.com. I specialize in mentoring people one-on-one with getting through designing their first LARP or on specialized LARP topics, especially for people who are new to LARP, people who are intimidated by designing their first LARP, and people who have been marginalized in the live-action role-playing game community because it is kind of tough to get in there. We all kind of need a hand up to get in. So that is what I do, and I take, I have two ways of operating. I do have people who sponsor individuals to go through the program so that participants can get the program for free and I get paid for my time. And then I also have people who pay and just go through the program. So depending on your circumstances, you might have more money than time and you might want to sponsor somebody to go through the program, or you might have the resources to pay for the mentorship and you kind of want me to walk you through it. That's cool. And we go ahead and set out a plan so I can walk you through the program start to finish, and by the end of the program, you have your own live-action role-playing game designed. So that's kind of the idea behind LARP Mentor. So again, if you happen to have any questions, go ahead and put that in here. So we're going to start in just a second, and feel free to jump in, introduce yourselves. I want to know who's here. I want to know what questions you have. But let me do a little bit about our agenda here. We're going to talk about how to initiate co-designing a live-action role-playing game with one or more others. We're going to talk about what you need to do that, the conversation that you need to have with those other people. We're going to talk about how often these things actually materialize into a fully designed concept and, where you should start there. We're also going to talk about interpersonal dynamics and assessing the strengths and weaknesses of your LARP design partner. That's a huge deal because if you don't go into this knowing what you're bad at and good at, then you're going to have a tough time, and you need to have that from the other people you're designing with. We're also going to talk about the kind of documentation you should have when you co-design, as well as how to actually plan and execute your LARP. So again, I sound robotic. Sorry about that. I am operating on a super old Mac, but as you can see behind me, there are some new machines coming up. Hopefully it's not the output. Thinking it might just be the broadcast itself, but I am operating on an old machine. However, we do have some newer machines behind me that in the future I'll be able to broadcast on, so I'm excited about that. Hopefully the robotic stuff goes away in the future. So again, feel free to pop questions in there, and we'll get started with the agenda. So first of all, I've described what LARP Mentor is all about, and in addition to doing that kind of thing, I also walk people through co-designs and making some introductions, and we're going to get into that as we go, but I really want to focus on you and how I can help you succeed. So the first thing is, how do you initiate a co-designing relationship with somebody else who designs LARPs? And this is something that people get really nervous about because they're like a fan of someone and they want to design with them, or even if they're good friends and they just kind of want to kind of initiate that conversation, they don't really know how to do it. And I've co-designed, right now I'm co-designing just about everything I'm working on, because I've bitten off so much, way more than I can chew, even in my own design world for the Geek Initiative LARPs, that I've actually handed off and started to pay and share payment with other designers so that they can develop this role too. So that's a pretty important thing there too, is knowing kind of when you're doing more than you can handle and managing your whole world if you've already started on your own. So that's one way I do it. I start with people who are active participants in my LARP, people who are who I get along well with. I kind of look for certain qualities, people who complement my skills. Because there are some people that I have co-designed with, like my best friend Callie. She and I share many of the same skills, which is great because we're both Pisces, we're like on the same page with everything, but a lot of our strengths overlap. And you want to look for somebody who can cover some of your weaknesses. Now, Callie is also fantastically organized. I am not the most organized person in the universe. So Callie can kind of fill in for me there. I am a little bit more bolder and a little bit more marketing oriented, so I'll go out there and kind of like work on that stuff a little bit more. So we cover some of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Now, when I work on projects with other people, you might know LARP Chat Live is a broadcast that I founded, but I now do with Jess and Mari every other Wednesday, opposite of this stream. And we all have really different but complementary skills. Mari has a great business sense. She's a very good project manager. Jess is great at graphics. She is great at the technical aspects of streaming, right? And I founded the broadcast, and I bring a certain amount of audience to it, and people who are going to ask some really interesting questions. And I'm also a good Q&A person. I'm a good interviewer. I have that NPR personality, they say. So we all really bring something strong to the table there. And that's a great thing about collaboration in general. And that's not a LARP. That's just a broadcast about LARP, just like this is. But it's something that kind of helps. So if you're already friends with somebody, I would recommend starting out with one of two paths. You can have a structured idea you want to pitch to them, or you can just say, hey, I want to work with you. And I've had this kind of conversation, the hey, I want to work with you conversation with a couple people. Shoshana Kessick and I always, every time we get together, we're like, I want to work with you. So I'm going to work with her. I don't know what on. She wants to work with me, but we're just two designers who admire each other's work and want to work together. So that's a totally valid way to start. You don't have to come with a bag full of ideas. But the other way, especially if you don't know the person well already, is to come with more of a pitch. So when I first met with Pertho Productions, I had a few games that I wanted to pitch because I didn't have the finances to actually run them, but I had really great ideas, and I already have a community built around the live action role-playing games that I run. So what I did for them is I brought some documentation, and I actually pitched specific games, and now we're working on one together. It's kind of slow going, but it's happening. So one thing you can do is actually pitch it to them just like you're an author pitching to an established publisher, or a scriptwriter, a screenwriter pitching to a movie studio. You have to kind of think about it that way. And if you don't know somebody as well from the get-go, that's a better way to do it, especially if you get somebody to do the introduction. A lot of people who go through the LARP Mentor program or who are interested in it, because we're still kind of new, one of the things they actually really want out of it is getting the introduction to these designers they want to work with. And that's totally valid. You get those introductions, you need to have a formal pitch ready to roll if you really want to talk to them about producing it. And I know some studios are going in the direction of producing other people's LARPs. And that means you need to have a pretty firm idea. You don't want to look disorganized if they're in it for the production and they're in it for the, even to make money, because it is a business in many instances. So, again, you have that informal process, and then you also have that formal introduction and pitch. If you have a formal pitch, that should come also in a document that you can share with them. And don't be afraid to start talking about NDAs or non-disclosure agreements immediately, especially if you don't know somebody well. You shouldn't necessarily trust someone with your intellectual property or your idea. So LARP designers, including myself, are notoriously terrible about this. We always kind of toss ideas back and forth. I know Joe is in the chat here. We've he's heard like all my ideas, right? And I trust him, but it's probably like terrible that I go around and tell people my stuff. You can get away with it to a degree because people know that IP I've already run into digital LARP is my IP, and it would just be like you'd be a social pariah if you stole it and made money off of it. But LARP is growing up, and LARP is moving into other mediums, and there's a lot of transmedia stuff going on. So it's good if you can to, as you have these conversations, say, hey, do you feel comfortable signing a non-disclosure agreement first? And if the other person doesn't, then that could be a little bit of a red flag, or that they kind of play a little fast and loose with the rules, and you could get into some business trouble with them later. So even though I could be better about saying that, I certainly have signed NDAs, LARP and otherwise, concerning intellectual property, and I will gladly always do so if somebody's talking to me about it. You find it hilarious if someone stole your game. Yeah, most good art is based on theft, and one thing we do a lot in LARP design, I have an idea right now that I'm working on, is at least say that it's inspired by something, right? So I'm working on one LARP that takes place in an enclosed setting, and it's partially inspired by something else. I'm just going to say it, I'm going to say it's inspired by this style or this game. That's generally okay. You want to run it by your lawyer too if it's a bigger thing and you're making money, but generally that's how it goes. So you want to have a certain rapport before you approach somebody about co-designing. And this could be a formal introduction from another person. So like if I have a good reputation in the LARP community and I introduce you to the designer you want to meet, that can help you build rapport, but you kind of want to have a good reputation already and understand that the first thing that designer is going to do, because the first thing I do when somebody approaches me, if I don't already know them, I'm checking out their social media. Who are they friends with? Who has endorsed their work? Who has gone to their LARPs before? And it's okay if they're new. I like working with people who haven't produced LARPs before, because then I can teach them my preferences, and then when they go to produce a LARP in terms of like safety and stuff like that, then they have my good habits in there and my best practices, so that can be good too. Almost like the first restaurant job I had, the person who trained me was like, no, it's good that you don't have any serving experience because I can teach you the right way. So yeah, do consider people who haven't, if you're an experienced designer anyway, definitely consider people who haven't produced LARPs before. But you want to have some kind of rapport and some kind of reputation. So your introduction can be with somebody you already know and you want to produce something. It can be an informal conversation, or you can have a very formal conversation with somebody you received a formal introduction to, and you should have a pitch document ready, especially if you're looking at them just to kind of pony up the money. And if you at all want to know more about pitch documentation and what that looks like, I can show you. But my secret that others would probably tell you is terrible, my pitch documentation is actually just my initial design doc. It's like a 1 or 2 pager that details some stuff about my big idea for the LARP. Why do that work twice? It should be clear, it should be concise, it should contain all that information. And if you need those, let me know. I can send those your way. They're also on geekinitiative.com. If you look at any of the digital LARPs, spoiler alert, the landing pages I use to get people to sign up for my digital LARPs, those are also my design documents. I don't have a super secret, long, detailed thing most of the time, especially not for digital LARPs. And that's okay too, especially if you have a small 4-hour LARP or something like that. So you've made your introduction. The other person says they're interested in working with you. The next thing you need to do is talk about your strengths and weaknesses. Who does what? What aspects of the project do you like? For example, I like making characters. I like working one-on-one with people and designing character survey questions. I like GMing. I do not like scheduling. I hate scheduling. I hate doing payment collection. I hate the business aspect of it, which is super common for LARP designers, so, but I'm just naturally not as interested in doing that stuff. I do it when I work solo, but when I don't work solo, I sure love working with people who love doing that stuff. And it's important to be out there and upfront about what you can do, what you like to do, and what you do not like to do. And again, I'll use the Larp Chat Live thing as an example just because we're such a smooth team. You know, we have a lot of skills that cross over as well. We're all capable of designing graphics. We're all capable of putting together a website. But honestly, Jess is the best at those things, and she actually enjoys doing it. So that's kind of how we settled on, okay, Jess does this. I do most of the social media scheduling for Larp Chat Live. We can all do that. We all know how, but that just falls into my marketing skill set, and it's kind of my thing that I do for the group, right? Mari's better at project management, keeping everyone on track, and she has she's a background in education, so she's very good at dividing up tasks for us, just like a professor would. Super easy. We're all really comfortable with it, and that's where you want to get to with your partners on projects. And it's actually really helped me work with them on other things. So yeah, project management is a huge one. Who is going to actually manage your project? What tools are you going to use? When we did Pandemonium, Ryan Hart was like the architect of project management and put it all in Basecamp and managed every task for everybody in there. That was a huge project, and that required a tool that he used very effectively to kind of keep us on the same track, on the same page. This also includes brainstorming sessions. A lot of people leave these out. You don't want to only have an initial brainstorming session. You want to be talking about your design through the whole thing, through the whole process. You want to have periodic get-togethers, and I think some of them should be spontaneous. When you start jamming and you have an idea, you want to follow up, on that idea and kind of talk about that as you can. Occasionally, Mari and I hang out after Larp Chat Live and just keep talking because we hit on an idea during the broadcast, and then we're like, ooh, that could be something really cool. We both like doing that. And that leads into design talk, right? So having those spontaneous and planned design meetings are important, even after your initial structure is done. Marketing. When do you start marketing? Who is responsible for it? What about your marketing calendar? Are you using inbound content marketing like blogging to get your message out there? Every blog I do is inadvertently an inbound advertisement for everything I do, including Larp Chat Live, including Larp Mentor, including my Larps. It doesn't seem like those things sell tickets, but they do, right? I'm here as Larp Mentor giving you free information, but this is like going to result in signups. This is, some of the people watching this have already signed up and they want this as their starting point. That's awesome. That's what it's there for. So you need to give a little to get a little, and somebody needs to be in charge of producing that content. As far as co-designing, that's one of my strengths, and co-developing is doing a marketing and content plan. The business aspects of it. Is there an investment involved? If so, who's putting up the money? Venues cost money. Insurance costs money. Getting an LLC costs money. All that stuff also needs to be managed, tracked, and all of the profits, if you're doing a for-profit LARP, need to be divided. Who's keeping track of all that? Who does that stuff? Guess what? Not me. You need to be in business with somebody who's great at doing that money stuff, and you need to agree on who makes what right away. So after that, other resources that you want to share. Not just your skills, but tools you might have. I mentioned Basecamp before. I mentioned social media tools before. You kind of have to get together because, for example, I use CoSchedule to schedule social media. That has some empty slots on it. Why buy another tool to manage social media if I'm already paying for one, right? So when you pull your resources, you're going to be able to find something cool like that. You're also going to be able to find other resources, like, for example, if you co-design with me and we're doing something really different, I might say, hey, you should totally come on Larp Chat Live, or hey, I know some podcasts you might want to be on that other LARP designers do, and you got to get together and really brainstorm and think about those resources. I can't emphasize those brainstorming sessions enough. Those are just completely one of the most valuable things. Impromptu brainstorming and planned brainstorming sessions. Please keep doing them throughout your project, throughout your process. You're going to hit, just like with the Kickstarter campaign, you're going to hit that mid-campaign slump. You're going to hit the main, that main design phase slump too, especially for large project. where you're like a little more than halfway through, whether or not ticket sales are involved. Just the design itself is going to feel like you're slogging along and you have that whole project management list. You need to have those creative meetings and that creative energy to really keep yourself pumped about it. And if you're doing the kind of project where you're advertising it consistently, where you're interacting and building your community consistently before you launch, which if you already have an established studio, you really should be doing, like getting hype. Like I already have hype getting up for my future LARPs that take place in the same universe because I want people to be ready to buy when I do them, when I launch them. So we have our Riders of the Apocalypse coming out, and I've generated hype for them through the last 2 digital LARPs I've run. So I know when tickets go on sale, they're just going to go. They're just going to sell. I don't have to spend a lot of time even really advertising or marketing them because they've already put the work in. That also keeps me going as a designer. I hit a bit of a slump. I had some health issues. I had a lot of other obligations. I had to reschedule some of my deal makers games and postpone things that come after that because I need to focus on giving people what they've already bought. That means Riders gets further delayed. I wanted to do Riders in December. But people are still hyped for it. So I need to deliver on these deal makers runs and then keep going there, right? But the hype is already built, and that's really important, and the players keep me going. They message me, oh, where's my character? What am I doing? And especially when it's just me or me writing the characters, even though other people are GMing, that's super important. You really have to do that. You really need to like rely on others' energy sometimes to make it work. So definitely those brainstorming sessions are important. That's also to say that your co-designer isn't the only person you rely on. You have other people in your life who you're going to rely on. Some of them might understand LARP, some of them might not, but they might still understand the importance of getting a project done, or they might academically understand it. I'm lucky enough to be dating a LARPer, so when I'm totally jazzed about a design, or even playing a game, he completely understands. That wasn't always the case for me though, and when you have those other dynamics in various interpersonal relationships, it's really tough. So consider that too, and consider kind of letting, if you have a partner especially, like letting them know, hey, this is what I'm up to. I'm going to need to rely on you a little bit for support. That's an important thing, to keep that communication open, because they need to know what you're doing, even if they're not involved in the design process. And whether or not they should be is an entirely other conversation. And my short answer to that is yes, sometimes, but not always. And you should always kind of have your own thing and things you co-design with others. So, that support network at home is important outside of your business relationships. Super important. We as designers and members of the LARP community have a lot of relationships where you're doing business with someone, but you're also friends with them. So I'm friends with, or at the very least friendly with, everybody who gives me money to do this LARP mentor program, right? I'm still friends with them. We have a rapport. We LARP together. Sometimes I play their LARPs too. It's a dynamic thing. And there are a couple designers I know who say, like, they reinforce that this is a business relationship. I enforce those boundaries a bit less, because I believe that in a small community, you can appropriately be friends with somebody and have a drink with somebody and, design a LARP with someone. And that's okay, and that's kind of like the magic of the industry. But you need to find where you are with people there and kind of define that, because after a certain point, you got to say, like, okay, I do this for a living, hand me money. And you have to also expect other people to say that too. Like, I wouldn't expect another designer just to give me free ideas or something like that. And I saw that coming up on a post too. So being aware of that, especially as you delve into co-designing, important stuff. Documentation. Where do you sign it? When do you sign it? What do you need? So in addition to the NDA or non-disclosure agreement that you should consider during your initial conversation about designing a LARP with somebody else, there's other documentation that, that's going to happen. And that can include, documentation about who gets what percentage and how much, and contracts that you sign, venue contracts, who's legally responsible, that kind of thing. So you need to plan for that, you need to sign it, and you might also need legal consultation on that. When you're co-designing, especially for a larger thing, both of you should individually consider having your own lawyer, and maybe a studio and you, or whoever many parties are working with it. It's never unprofessional or offensive for somebody to go to a lawyer about a contract that you've sent them. It's actually a big sign of respect. So when somebody says they've done that they're having their lawyer look over materials that I send them, I think that's awesome. Like, they want to cover themselves and they're taking this business arrangement super seriously. And I should be doing the same thing too. So keep that in mind too. It's standard mode of operating when money's involved, and even if you're not looking to profit, you want to protect yourself. So make sure that's in place too. If possible, you want to go into business with people who have LLCs. I'm still in the process of getting mine. There's a little cost involved to getting it, but it does offer them some protection and you some protection. So especially if you are an LLC, you want to look into going into business with other people that do have an LLC. If not, you should be working with them as an independent contractor of your LLC. So I have worked with the Game Theater. I have worked with Learn Larp. I have worked with Sinking Ship Creations. And in those instances, I am the independent contractor because I don't yet have my everything done. I'm very close, but it's not all done. So I would recommend paying them out as an independent contractor if you were the one with the LLC. If you're not the one with an LLC, then I would recommend operating as a sole proprietor / independent contractor and having them hand the money with a contract in place and paying you out. That's worked very well for me. And again, the community is still small enough, not for long, but it's still small enough that it kind of takes care of itself. So when somebody screws people over and doesn't pay them, everybody knows, right? So the other thing that you need, the other things you need to define your timeline. You need to define your different interests, the genre, the actual thing you want to design. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What's the tone? And where should you start with that? The safety culture. That will give you a very good indication of whether you're working with somebody who's on the same page as you. If you're talking about safety for your LARPers and they are not interested, that's probably an indication you're going to actually run into hang-ups elsewhere in the design process, elsewhere with the paperwork. They maybe not want to be too legal about it. And that's a big red flag. And those are things that you want to look out for. But if you are in the same place on safety culture, that's a good start. That's an indication that you should probably be working together. And I've seen people disagree about safety culture while they're working on a project together. And, you can disagree, but it depends on the nature of the disagreement. It's one thing to say, your glasses are ruining my immersion. And it's another thing to say, I prefer this safety mechanic over the one you suggested. That's different, right? That's compromise. That's a collaborative thing. If it's just you're throwing out stuff that's completely non-negotiable for the other designer, it's a big indication that it's not going to work. So if you start with safety culture, you're going to know right away. And when you plan and execute, about 50% of your ideas they're just not going to happen. Like, you might have 100 good ideas and only 50 of them are going to make it through to the end, which compared to other media like books and movies and stuff like that is actually a really high ratio. But not all of your projects are going to see the light of day. I love designing historical stuff, but it's a real pain in the ass to do. I mean, in addition to like the cultural sensitivity issues and expenses, and just you don't want to hurt somebody or marginalize them, historical costuming, historical sites, those are expensive things. So sometimes designing historically and immersively is very expensive. Those are tough for me to produce. Most of the 50% of the things I have that aren't going to get produced are pretty much historical. My sci-fi stuff, right? That's a little different. My fantasy stuff, yeah, that gets produced. My modern stuff, easy. I run a lot of convention games set in the modern era, or the contemporary era. So planning and execute, just remember half of the stuff doesn't materialize. Sometimes you might start producing with a studio or somebody and then you have to take it elsewhere, and your paperwork should have a contingency for that. I'm not a lawyer. And I, haven't worked with that paperwork as much as I should have, but I would recommend getting all that in place and including in that a contingency for if we decide not to go forward with it. For example, you retain the rights to your IP so you can take it somewhere else, especially if you're the one not ponying up the money to produce it. Because if I lost my IP, then I wouldn't be able to take it to another studio to produce it. And I've had stuff where I've worked with one studio to make it and then had to take it somewhere else. And there are no hard feelings, but that's just how it happens. It's just schedules and time. It's another thing, scheduling. You want to make things that don't conflict with your other studios and partners' dates, right? So I work regularly with a few different studios. And also, where does my player base come from? Would it be smart for me to schedule something at the same time as New World Magischola? Probably not, because a lot of my players come out of that community. And also, I don't want to screw over people who I work with and, like, have two events going on at the same time if I can avoid it. Inevitably, sometimes it happens, but overall, you want to avoid that if you can, especially when you work well with people, right? And especially, like in my example, if they're bigger than you. You don't want to be like the young blood coming in here being like, yeah, I'm going to compete with, this like friend I have and colleague. That's a terrible idea. So definitely consider that scheduling as you go as well. So defining your interests, your time, the amount of time that you can budget for it in the week is important to be upfront about too. And it doesn't always have to be equal. So as the marketer, right, in a lot of projects, I'll do a lot of my stuff towards the end of the project because I have a consistent marketing schedule, but then towards the end of the project, I'm promoting it more. I'm getting out there more about it and talking about it more. Whereas the person who organized the event might have put more time in up front because they're booking a venue. I have nothing to do with that. I'm just like working on a marketing plan in the beginning and building a community and getting interest. So the time isn't always proportionate, or the time could vary depending on where you are on the schedule and what your duties are. And, like, be sensitive to it, but don't be like, oh, well, I spent 4 hours on it this week and you didn't spend any. Sometimes that's how it works. You gotta be realistic about your schedule. That's a big, hard lesson I've learned in working with myself and others, because you have to plan for things to not work, too. And then the tone. Not just the tone of the LARP itself, but the community. If you're not on the same page with that tone, with it being, as I advise, a safety-focused culture, it's just not going to work. You're going to get people misunderstanding it. When I started working with Pertho, who works on Damarung, there was some confusion from their audience about, like, what to expect. People came into this thing like, oh, wow, it's like Viking stuff. And some people were just like, cool, Viking stuff. Grab a, foam or latex spear and I'm all in. And other people were like, so I'm a person of color, and is this like a white supremacy thing? Because white supremacists have unfortunately co-opted a lot of Viking Nordic culture and symbols, and that is very much not what Pertho Productions or their event was about. So I advise them to put out a statement against white supremacy, and that actually encouraged some community members to leave because, let's be real, there were a couple Nazis in there. Goodbye, we don't want you. But it also encouraged a lot of other people to come in and actually participate and actually buy tickets because they were like, oh wow, you're willing to, stand up against white supremacy and to define what your event's about. So you need to collaborate with people who will very specifically define what the event and the culture is about. So that's really important. And I'm winding down with what I have to say here. If you have any other questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat and I'll answer them. But I would say, like, those are the main points. And the planning and execution are kind of like the last things I want to cover. Planning is 90% of your execution. Your execution is also who does what and when. And that varies tremendously depending upon the size of the event and how you're running it. I mean, heck, I, hire GMs to run Deal Makers and Dreamers, and I'm hiring designers to design other parts of the world of the Geek Initiative LARPs, and some of them I'm not even going to be present in, right? Like, I've done a really good job of vetting those people and working with them and mentoring them, just kind of through play and design and conversation, or formally through Larp Mentor. And I'm not even going to be present at, maybe like their second run. So defining those expectations is important. They might need a hand. What if they need a hand? Who's going to be present there? I might be able to hop in, but if not, I've got other people who can kind of hop in and support. So knowing who will be where during the actual event is really important too. You don't want that kind of misunderstanding. I've seen that where like the co-organizer is off, off camp, and the main organizer is like, well, what the heck? Like, why don't you have my back? So make sure that that's really clear right before your event, because a lot gets lost in the shuffle. How do you communicate during an event? Cell phones, Discord channel, walkie-talkies. It's kind of tough with a lot of events. If you're not running a modern or futuristic event, it's kind of weird to like whip out a walkie-talkie in the middle of a battlefield, if you're doing medieval fantasy. And ultimately, safety is more important. Communicating safety stuff is most important. But my point is, you got to think about how that's going to go down with your organizers, and even maybe plan for some out-of-game check-ins during your event with your co-organizers and co-designers. Is this game flowing the way we thought it would? How are we going to do that? And your feedback forms will also reveal that too. So if you give feedback forms, if there are holes in your collaboration process, you're going to find those in the feedback forms. Design with somebody who isn't afraid to do that, please. Make sure that they're always ready to improve and work on something more and move forward with that. That's just kind of like the professional way to do it. So that kind of comes to the end of what I have to say. Again, I'm Tara. I'm with Larp Mentor. You can learn more at larpmentor.com. And if you haven't signed up yet, you can go there to do it. We're also at facebook.com/larpmentor. And we are here every other week. This is the first one we're doing. And on our off weeks, we're on Larp Chat Live, which is facebook.com/larpchatlive or larpchat.live. And that's where I'll be next Wednesday. But the Wednesday after that, we're going to be talking about safety workshops and an introduction to safety workshops. So if you have any other questions, best place to reach me is on Facebook, facebook.com/larpmentor. Thanks again for joining, and I hope you have a great night.